Hello, and welcome to Back Talk Teens. I'm your host, Jeff, and I'm here with Ryan and Bree. Today we have two great guests to talk with, both who had a big impact on civil rights issues in their community.
YBA Sports.
Richard Cole is our first guest. He has 3 decades of broad experience and is a successful former Massachusetts Assistant Attorney General, as a Civil Rights Division Chief, and as an attorney.
Currently, Mr. Cole is a civil rights and safe schools consultant, providing guidance and training to educators on both how to handle, approach bullying, harassment, and school climate and safety. Over many years, Mr. Cole has trained, advised, and assisted many thousands of people on a wide range of civil rights and discrimination-related issues. He is extremely well known for his programs. Mr. Cole, welcome, and we thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
At any time during the show, if you at home want to call in or ask questions or talk to us, please call us at 508-202-4779 or Skype us at YBA Talk. So, Mr. Cole, how did you first become interested in civil rights?
I think both from my parents, who were very active in civil rights, but also I grew up during the civil rights era, and I saw people with tremendous courage put their lives on the line to help other people benefit from the rights that all Americans should get. So watching those people go down into the South, demanding civil rights for African Americans, for me, inspired me to say, this is what I want to do in my life.
Who do you think was your biggest inspiration, if you had to pick one person who really just stood out to you?
For me, it was the Kennedys, both John and Robert. And that was during that era. But I think for me, really, Robert Kennedy, who really took the mantle from John. I was lucky enough to be at the Democratic Convention when Robert Kennedy spoke after his brother was killed, and just the feeling of love and understanding of how important he was for change in America.
Can you tell us the difference between bullying and harassment?
Yes. Bullying is when people are, for example, young people are try to be mean with others through the use of power. They basically have psychological, physical, or social power over someone with the intent of being mean, to hurt someone. Harassment is actually something different. It's a civil rights violation. It's protected by civil rights laws. So we're talking about, there are certain areas, race, color, national origin, gender, disability, sexual orientation, that have special protection in our country. And harassment is when you're targeted for one of those reasons. It's actually a civil rights violation, much like if you were an employee in a workplace, you would be protected against racial harassment or sexual harassment or disability-based harassment. So although the behavior can be the same, harassment is based on stereotypes. It can be based on bias and prejudice, while bullying is really not about that.
So is it true that if you're being harassed, you can't file a case against it? That if you have a civil rights case, that the state has to file a suit against it?
No, actually, under civil rights laws, under federal civil rights laws, for example, if a school does not, after they receive information that you're being harassed, that means you've been the victim of or the target of severe, persistent, or pervasive harassment, and they don't take reasonable steps to stop it and prevent it from reoccurring, they have to take reasonable steps, then actually you could file a lawsuit individually, a civil rights lawsuit against the school district and against its administrators. You also can go to the U.S. Department of Education Office of Civil Rights, who have enforcement powers to force schools to make the changes that are needed to protect students.
What is the story behind your Safe School initiative?
Well, it's interesting. For many years, we were working where schools were in crisis and would call us up after a major incident. And you'd go in there in reacting to a crisis where a school community was divided, polarized, where people were injured and victimized. And so what we tried to do was to bring people who've had experiences in many different areas together, and to affirmatively try to help schools with making the changes they needed to, one, to make sure that all students are protected, and to really create a climate of respect, which required the partnership of students. And we worked very intensely with students in every school.
So what do you think the biggest problem in schools with civil rights and harassment is today?
Well, when I have done student focus groups and surveys, we have found that the level of harassment based on sexual harassment is very high. Sexual orientation-based harassment, that means whether someone is actually or perceived to be gay or lesbian, they've been targeted. But I think, and certainly race and color, but I think most interesting is very high percentage of students with disabilities are targeted for very extreme forms of harassment in schools.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's so sad.
It is, and in students, we often will ask to meet a focus group of just students who have special education plans.
Especially in Massachusetts, since gay marriage is legal.
Well, this is both disability and sexual orientation. Both are high targeted, but and yes, on one hand, you have lots and lots of young people who I think accept differences much more than earlier generations. I really do believe that. But on the other hand, there still is very high level of sexual insults that occur in schools, racial name calling, anti-gay slurs, or just saying that's so gay, or statements about students being retards or being sped, really pervades school communities. And the only way to stop that is where students working with the adults decide that they don't want to live and be educated in a school where that's going on.
Have the types of issues changed over the years through generations?
Yes. I mean, it's interesting that we just celebrated, for example, the Americans with Disabilities Act, 20-year anniversary. And so issues around disabilities, most people were very invisible about that. They were not, unless they had a serious physical handicap, which you would notice, a disability you would notice. Certainly, gay and lesbian was not out in the open in the way that more students are out in the open. So you have gay-straight alliances in high schools, which certainly years ago wasn't true. But I think the issues dealing with sexual harassment, racial and ethnic harassment, it's interesting because there was, in many schools, no racial or ethnic diversity. Now there's much more, so there's both an opportunity to get to know students from different backgrounds, but also the potential for stereotypes to drive relationships.
Yeah, in my school we have clubs that support accepting people for their differences. Like we have a club for people who have different sexual orientation. We have a club for people who have disabilities, or supporting people who have disabilities, and removing the word like retard from vocabulary in our school. And it's been a big push, and teachers enforce it. And if anyone says it, most likely someone's going to step out and say.
Yeah, last year we had an actual dance to support forgetting the R words. They said retard, to forget it, and it really did a number. A lot of people stopped using it. I mean, of course, there's a few people that still use it, but I mean, they're looked at differently now. Those people are said like, hey, can you not say that? That's actually extremely hurtful to some and to everyone now, because everyone can see sometimes what those people are dealing with and what's going on.
I think you did two things. One is students are stepping up to be allies and saying, this is not acceptable. And that puts social pressure on those that are involved in that behavior, where before, in fact, they thought that they were going to get some kind of social credit for engaging in this behavior.
Exactly.
And then you also have, by doing it in an organized way, that's the power that students have, is when they get it organized and say, we together are not going to allow the school to be this way anymore. It's amazing, and what you're talking about is exactly the kinds of programs that I have seen really work well in schools.
I've heard of another organization called Spread the Word to End the Word. I don't know if you've heard about that. It's about they've done fundraisers like to raise awareness about using the word retard and how it's like not politically correct.
You see, it's beyond even the word politically correct, because what happens is when stereotypes are used all the time, people internalize those stereotypes. So if repeated over and over again, and also people get very angry. So you have the risk of people getting angry and striking back because you're calling them names that actually hurt them in a way. And even though they seem to be smiling sometimes, they're hurting inside. And so I agree with you about the importance of really standing up in the way that you're talking about that you're doing in your schools.
You need to get the word out too, like everyone needs to the fact that it's not okay to say that, and a lot of people just say it like not even thinking that it's being mean, that it could possibly be hurting someone, but it can be hurting someone, and it can make someone's life end because you said something that you didn't think would be a big deal, but it is a big deal.
So how can educators, parents, and mentors help with a cause such as having awareness for words that you shouldn't say?
I mean, first of all, you described what happened in your school, which is that the adults in the school community consistently have stood with the students to say, that's not acceptable here. You know, you can't use that word in my classroom, not in this hallway. And so joining together, the adults can't do this alone, students can't do this alone. But together, it really can make a huge difference in changing the climate so that students feel everyone feels more comfortable in school. Because it's all about learning. If you're worried about, look, I was a target when I was in 7th grade. I got targeted by a small student, a little guy. But he had 3 big friends. And he just decided that he was going to make my life miserable. And I tell this story because I can remember today how difficult it was to be listening in class, because what I was doing was I was thinking about what hallway I was going to walk through without having to confront one of these guys. And at the end of the school day, I was thinking about which doorway I was going to run out of so that these guys wouldn't jump me. And so that was my school day. And I was lucky because I had a friend, someone I had just gotten to know, who found out that I foolishly went to a dance off school grounds and got jumped because I didn't have any of my friends with me, of that group of friends. And he found out about it, and he, because he was a very popular, big student, went over to those guys and said, "You leave him alone, he's a friend of mine." That was the end for me. For most students, they don't, you know, unless you have someone who's going to stand up for them, it will not go away unless it's reported and adults deal with this situation.
Yeah. That's so horrible you have to deal with that.
It's part of the experience that drives me today in terms of the work that I do, because I know, and I represent families of kids who are targeted, in which the schools are not doing everything they can to help protect them. At least the parents believe that they're not doing enough. And
it's good that you can relate to kids these days, even though some problems have changed. It's all the same feelings and the same basis. Like
it's all still the same. It might be like a different cover, but it's all like the same meaning to it.
It does, and it's the same emotion. And when I ask adults, or when I talk to young people in focus groups, it's the same pain, it's the same anger that I felt. And I was humiliated, and that's how people feel when they're targeted. You know, what is it about me? I didn't tell my parents, because I was humiliated to tell my parents that this happened to me. What, you know, what was wrong with me that I would be targeted? And I think that's how people feel. They feel there's something wrong with them, when in fact it's the problem of the perpetrator and not the victim. So.
We're going to take a short break, but coming up after the break, we'll introduce you to Jordan Starr, a high school junior who is spending this semester in Washington, D.C., taking part in an exclusive and challenging program focused solely on civil rights, ethics, and leadership. That's next on Back Talk Teen.